We've been looking at the life of David. And this morning I want us to take a little bit different perspective with David and the importance of developing right friendships and keeping a good attitude. And this is so important for each and every one of us. If you would open your Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 18, this is concerning David and Jonathan. Jonathan, his father, is David, who is right now king of Israel. Jonathan is heir apparent to the throne, really to take over next in line after his father passes from the scene. But he realizes something. He knows that he's not to be the next one. God has not chosen him. God has chosen David to be the next king. So I want you this morning to put yourself in Jonathan's position. You are the king, the son of the king, and willing, ready to take over if need be, or when your father steps aside, but in your heart knowing, you know what? No, I am not the next king. God has not set me to be there. He has set somebody else, David, who is to be there. Notice what we see here in chapter 18, starting with verse number 1. After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him, did not let him return to his father's house. Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing, gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. There is a covenant being made between two individuals. Today, I don't think we really understand that word covenant very much of what they're referring to here. This is a covenant between two individuals. It's a commingling of lives. Everything that David has becomes Jonathan's. Everything that Jonathan has becomes David's. Now, David doesn't have a whole lot to give to Jonathan. He's got maybe a sheepskin and a staff and a slingshot to give to him. And what does Jonathan have? He has the top of the line, the best weaponry, everything that he can give to David. There's a transfer that's taking place. Jonathan is saying, David, I recognize that God has chosen you, and I am willfully laying down my place to be the next king, and I'm giving that over to you. And I will do everything in my power to see to it that you come to the throne. I will protect you with my life. That's what's happening with this transfer of weapons, his robe, his tunic, everything. He's saying, David, I'm laying this down to you because I desire God's will to be accomplished more than I desire my selfish whims and desires to be accomplished. I'm willing to lay that aside and set that down. Now, this friendship is based on helping the other accomplish God's purpose. How many times do we set out in life to help others accomplish what God's called them to do? Or are we more focused on us? I've got to do this. I need to do this. Well, that's important. We want to accomplish what God has, but I can almost guarantee that if you and I will focus on helping others accomplish what God has called them to do, He'll make sure that we accomplish what we've been called to do. That's the way God works. Give, and it'll be given back. Bless others, help them, and it'll be given back to you. And this is the heart that we see with Jonathan. He would freely give up the throne with its authority, its riches and power to give to another. And this is exactly what Jonathan did. Now, David reciprocates later on because Jonathan did not see this come to pass. Jonathan dies in battle before David becomes king. But Jonathan makes a covenant with him, and we see this later on also. And Jonathan says, listen, you becoming king, please take care of my family. And David does. There is battle that takes place. Jonathan has a son who something happens to that individual. While they're being attacked, Actually, what happens is they're fleeing. You can read the story, fleeing from David. David's coming in to take the throne, and Saul's family is in fear of what's happening, thinking that David is going to kill them all. And the nurse takes this young child and runs out and leaves and falls on the child. And the child becomes crippled in his legs and can't walk anymore. And when David comes to the throne, he said, is there any of the house of Saul or of Jonathan who I can bless and I can help? And there is one that he's able to reach out and to bring into the palace and help that young boy. Does anybody remember what his name is? Wow, very good, Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth is brought in, which is a whole story in and of itself of what happens and takes place, but he is able to eat and dine at the king's table. Jonathan held his end up of the covenant. David holds his end up of the covenant. Now, their friendship, what is it based on? We see this in verse number 1. It's based on love. It says, Jonathan loved David as himself. Think about this. David has everything to gain, and Jonathan has almost everything to lose in the natural. But Jonathan, God knit them together in his heart. He loved him as a soul. He would give his life for him. Be very careful who you surround yourself with. They will have a major impact on your life. Open, if you would, hold your place there and turn to Proverbs 22. Proverbs chapter 22, verses 24 and 25. This is a great proverb to live by. Do not make friends with a hot-tempered man. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn his ways and get yourself ensnared. Wow. Be careful who you're around. You will pick up on their traits. I remember several years ago, after I had, right when I was getting ready to graduate, I'd worked for a couple of years. He was a large hog farmer down by Sheldon. And wonderful family friends. And I worked out there for a couple of summers. And one of the summers, actually 2 of the summers, the previous pastor who was in Sheldon, his son came back to work. And I remember one year in particular, he was working, while he's there, working on the farm, and we worked together and then in different areas. And neat kid, but he started to pick up some words that weren't real good words. And he was around this most of the day, and pretty soon he began to pick up, and I would hear him talking. I'm like, whoo, wow, when you go home, I don't know what's going to happen here, but some of this language is maybe going to have to change. It wasn't the best. Well, he was around that individual speaking that way. He began to pick it up. When he went home, his dad was pastoring. He was down in Des Moines at the time. And when he went home, this had become a part of him, just being there for a couple of months. And he began to talk this way, and it didn't last very long. All right? His dad corrected it really quick. Actually, I think he got soap in his mouth. And he was probably in lower high school, 9th or 10th grade, but it didn't matter with his dad, and it stopped real quick. Well, he was around that. The people that you're around, now think about Jesus. It says that he was a friend of sinners. It doesn't mean that we isolate ourselves from people, but we insulate ourselves from what is going on around us with the Word of God in our walk with the Lord. So we don't isolate, we insulate, okay? And it's important that we do that. Don't push yourself away. How are we going to reach others? I remember when Pastor St. John, who was our district superintendent, he had been in Hibbing for several years, and he was voted in as the district superintendent. He had planted the church up in Hibbing, did some wonderful things there. And when he was in the office in Minneapolis, I remember him sharing, he said, man, I got to get out of here. I need a break. He said, I'm getting Christian claustrophobia. I'm around too many Christians. He wasn't used to that. He was around sinners, if you will, those that weren't followers of Christ, a lot. And he was very welcoming and reaching out with his own life to reach out to individuals, just like Jesus was being a friend of sinners. Now, Jonathan loved God and David enough, like I said, to set aside his own ambitions and do everything in his power to protect David and to see him ascend to the throne. This takes an extremely strong person. Someone who is confident in who they are in Christ, humble in their heart to do something like this, to willfully lay down what was rightfully, in a sense, theirs in the natural, to give it to another. Now, David didn't squander the opportunities that he was given also. Look at 1 Samuel chapter 18. Look at verses 5 through 9. Whatever Saul sent David to do, David did it so successfully that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the people and Saul's officers as well. When the men were returning home after David had killed the Philistines, the women came out from all the towns of Israel to meet King Saul with singers and dancing with joyful songs, with tambourines and lutes. As they danced, they sang, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands." Saul was very angry. This refrain galled him. They have credited David with tens of thousands, he thought, but me with only thousands. What more can he get but the kingdom? From that time on, Saul kept a jealous eye on David. Now, everything that David was given to do, it says he did it successfully. If your boss gives you a task to do, is your desire to do it successfully, to do it to the best of your ability, to make your boss look good? Or is it, whatever, I just do as least as necessary to get the job done? No, we don't do it that. Everything that he gave David to do, he did it successfully. And notice David was rewarded. When they came in after battle, they're singing, Saul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands. So when God blesses you in life because of your faithfulness, guess what? Not everyone's going to be happy about it. Not everyone's going to like it. Not everyone's going to cheer you on and say, way to go, good job. There are going to be some people who will be very jealous of God's blessings on your life. That's what happened with Saul. Everything was going well with Saul until now he allows jealousy to enter into his heart. Now, people may become jealous of you because there's actually fear in their own heart. They see what God is doing in your life and they don't like it because they've not spent the time and they've not tapped in to what God has for them to do, so they become jealous of you. And God will continue to bless you even though other people might be jealous. Now, what happened with Saul and David, God began to bless him, bless David. Saul becomes jealous of that. But notice what David does. David continues to act wisely. The word, the Amplified of verse number 5 says, he prospered and behaved himself wisely. The word wisely means to be prudent, to perceive, to have insight. David knew his business and carried it out properly, and God honored him for it, as we see in verses 6 and 7. And again, not everyone's going to be happy. So, as a result of this, Saul demotes David. He is made, first of all, leader, one translation says, over the entire army. But now, when Saul becomes jealous of what God is doing through David, Saul will demote him. Notice what it says here in verses 12 and 13. Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with David but had left Saul. So he sent David away from him and gave him command over 1,000 men, and David led the troops in their campaign. So he went from being over all the troops, now reduced down to only 1,000 troops. Another translation says made him commander over only 1,000 men. What would your attitude be like if you were demoted on your job because you were so good? You did your best. You're honoring God. You're doing your job with excellence, with integrity. You want Christ to be glorified. You realize that your job is part of your mission field. You are a missionary to wherever it is that you're working. And you're just honoring the Lord, doing your job to the best of your ability, and your boss demotes you because they're jealous of you in the work that you're doing. What type of attitude would we have? Would we get angry? Would we lash out at our boss? Would we go above our boss's head and try to get our boss fired for what they're doing to us? how would we handle that situation? Now, you need to be led of the Spirit. However you deal with things, I'm not saying that everything that's done wrong needs to be swept under the rug or anything like that. Sometimes things need to be brought to light. Sometimes they need to be shared with those who are above you. But you need truly to listen to the Lord and how to handle that situation. David, it doesn't change him at all. He works with 1,000 men under his command just as well as he did over the entire army that Saul had. Notice how he reacted, verses 14 and 16. In everything he did, he had great success because the Lord was with him. When Saul saw how successful he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David because he led them in their campaigns. It didn't cause David to stumble a bit. He's demoted. He's like, okay, all right, I'm going to lead these 1,000 as well as I did everybody else. And guess what? God was still with him. See, the whole goal in all of this is not success in the world's eyes. Okay? Sometimes that does happen, obviously, and that's part of what the Lord has. But the whole goal is that God continues to work with you in whatever you're doing. Why? Because that's what His will is. The whole focus in life is to get to the point that in the end, we're like the Apostle Paul who says, I've kept the faith, I've finished my course. Therefore, there's a crown of righteousness laid up for me and all those who love His appearing. And to hear the Lord say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. So that's what it's all about, to hear those words. So it shouldn't matter to us if, okay, I'm the CEO of a corporation or something happens and I'm doing such a good job that some people don't like it who are underneath me and they get me demoted down to another spot. Now, this is easier said than done, okay? We can all sit here on a Sunday, yep, that's right, I'd act godly, perfect every single time. When you're under the pressure, because the feelings and the emotions will be there. The enemy's going to bring things against you. That dirty rat, how in the world did he? They don't deserve that. I'm gonna do this and that. And the Lord's saying, just relax, take a deep breath. Okay? I'm with you. That's the whole purpose. That's the whole goal. He continues to be with us. So don't allow outward circumstances to affect the way that you respond. Keep a right heart, keep a right attitude in the midst of all of that. If you move to a place that you begin to doubt some of these things, just remember some of the people that God used mightily. Think of Moses. He went through all the trouble of leading the rebellious people, and he didn't even get into the promised land. Think about it. He had several million people under his authority in the will or command, or what he's supposed to oversee as really the shepherd over those people. And Moses is leading them into the promised land. He's looking forward to it. I'm going to enter into the promised land. But something happens, and the people become very rebellious again and again and again. And Moses at times handles it really well, and he's that go-between, that intercessor for them. But there's one time when the people are complaining, and God had spoken to Moses at one time, strike the rock with your staff and water will come out. And he does. He honors the Lord, water comes out, yea, God. But then another time the people become so angry and rebellious against Moses, and he allows his emotions to control him. And God tells them, because they need water again, and God tells them, don't strike the rock, speak to it. But Moses is so ticked off, he takes that staff and he strikes the rock twice. Now water flows out, and the people are taken care of, but because of that, and we won't get into all that entails, it goes deeper than what you think. In all that Moses did because of that, God said, because of your disobedience in this, you're not going to enter into the promised land. Now Moses could have gotten furious and said, that's it, I'm done. These rebellious people caused me to strike that rock twice. If they wouldn't have such a lousy attitude, I wouldn't have done this. We can't blame anybody else for our actions. Okay? They can stir the pot, but no one can make you do anything. Moses, they stirred the pot, and he allowed his emotions to control him and affect his actions. When we do that, we're going to get in trouble. And he disobeys God. He strikes the rock twice, and God says, enough is enough. Now, Moses could have said, you know what, I'm done. I am done. For 40 stinking years, I've led these rebellious people around, and I'm tired of it, God. I'm done. And throw his hands in the air and said, enough with you. I'm going over here. I'm going to watch a few sheep. You people, I hope you all die in the wilderness. He could have had that attitude. To be honest with you, if something like that would have happened, I probably would have had those thoughts. But what does Moses do? No. Even though God said you're not going to enter in, Moses got his heart right back with the Lord, and he continued to be faithful to the Lord and lead those people. There were times everything in him wanted to get out of there. God, please, kill the people, just me and you. Let's go on, Get rid of these people. He had that attitude, and he's like, no. You've called me to do this. I will be faithful to you no matter what these people say, what they do, how they rebel against me. And God says, Moses, they're not just rebelling against you. They're actually rebelling against me. And so Moses says, Lord, I'm going to be faithful. So Moses dies. Anybody remember how old Moses was when he died? 120. He's 120. King James says his eye was not dim, nor was his strength abated from him. In other words, this guy was strong at 120, healthy, good eyesight, everything well. And you know what? We don't know exactly how Moses dies. He goes up to Mount, starts with an N, Nebo. He goes up to Mount Nebo. And we've had the opportunity, many of you have had, to be on Mount Nebo when you're in Jordan. It's in the country of Jordan right now. In Mount Nebo, and overlook the promised land. More as God's saying, Moses, you're not able to enter in, but I'm going to take you up here, and I want you to view the land that the people are going to enter into. Thank you for being faithful to me. You got carried away a little bit with the emotions there, but thank you for being faithful to me. I'll let you see the land. And no one knows what happens to Moses. He dies, but the Lord buries him. Okay? No one knows where Moses is buried. Now his body's there, but he's not there. Moses shows up in the New Testament. Okay? Now, if you're not sure where, here's your homework assignment, and I'll close with this. If you're not sure where Moses shows up in the New Testament, and not just his name being said, but he actually shows up, okay? And talks and appears to Jesus. Okay? And he's not the only one who shows up. So here's how God works. Moses physically at that time did not get to enter in the promised land, but you know what? He got to set his feet down in the promised land a few thousand years later when he comes back with the Lord somewhere that you're going to find this week, all right, in the New Testament, and sets his feet down and talks with Jesus. And there's some other people there too, Peter, James, and John. So see, that's your homework. See if you can find where Moses shows back up in the New Testament. But God was faithful to use him, okay? As Erma Bombeck said, we're always looking for the grass greener on the other side, as the great theologian Erma Bombeck. Anybody know who Erma Bombeck is? Yeah. Grass is always greener over the septic tank. There we go. Yep, that's right. It is. And guess what? It still needs to be mowed, no matter where you go. I believe a better saying is the grass is always greener where you water it. All right? Water the grass where you're planted. Where am I planted? I'm planted right here. Water the grass and do your best right there, and God will cause that to flourish and grow. Don't let other people get you into emotions to make rash decisions. You just be faithful to God. Choose your friends wisely, all right, because they will greatly affect your life, and you be an amazing friend to others.